Hello there, everybody. I'm Walter Stoeppelwerth. I'm the Asesor Externo to Novus Asset Management. We are blessed to have Rachel from Chispe here, who is a well-known macroeconomist and an important person at XP to discuss, what's going on in Brazil. Is that we've just had a very closely contested election where, the ex-president Lula has come out on top by about 2 million votes. It came down to the wire, and the open question that we have now is that what happens next with Brazil? What happens with Brazilians' assets, risk assets, because it's a market that actually has performed very well in the emerging market space this year because they've done a better job than most every other country in EM on inflation. Now, as we kick off, Rachel, is that one of the questions that I have at the top of my mind is that whether you like Bolsonaro or you don't like Bolsonaro, he has had a fantastic economy minister who has established a primary surplus from a very deep deficit in the middle of COVID to about 1.93% of GDP. But the newspapers that we read from Argentina are saying that we have a plan. Lula has a fiscal spending plan to help the poor and so forth that could be as much as 175 billion reais that would, clearly breach your fiscal law and so forth. And so how do you see this playing out? Because, they may have to, do what we call a decree, or, you guys call it medida provisoria, but that signal is a very negative signal for people who look at Brazil, because obviously your net debt to GDP at 58%, your gross debt at 77%, as the fiscal dynamics are always important. So how do you see all of this affecting sentiment for the local hedge funds and money managers, and from the people outside of the country who are looking at Brazil and saying, okay, Lula's here now, what does it mean, for the fiscal side of the equation?
No, perfect. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for the invite. I hope I managed to clear some things about Brazil. It's a very complicated scenario at the moment, as you can imagine. So as you said, we had really tight elections, and I think that the immediate reaction was mostly positive. So the immediate market reaction, we saw this in interest rate curves, and we saw it in Ibovespa, we saw it in the exchange rate, and I think it was mostly because the whole scenario pointed that we'll have a very stable transition of power. And I think this was one of the first fears, with the first concerns that market participants had, that because of some of the positioning that Bolsonaro was taking so far, a lot of people were a bit scared that he would contest the election results. And also because, right after the elections, we had some riots in favor of the current president, in favor of Bolsonaro, but all of that, I think now it's kind of like, we can say it's a bit water under the bridge, and everything points to a very stable, at least in that sense, in the institutional sense, a stable transition of power, which is good news. And then we enter what you just described, which is what everyone was pointing as the main fiscal challenge for the next government. But I think something's really, it's key to notice before, is that this fiscal challenge would be there regardless of the results. And this is because we've indeed managed to have, we will certainly have a surplus this year, a primary surplus, but this is a lot circumstantial. So we had a lot of the boost on our revenues come from commodity prices boom, and also because of past how can I say that, past loans that the BNDES, our big state bank, owed to the Treasury, and they advanced this from the past years. Also came from dividends. So a lot of So a lot of
Non-recurring
revenue.
tailwinds.
Exactly, that's the word that I was looking, not recurring revenues. So this is basically a lot of non-recurring revenue coming into the treasury, and also because a lot of the expenses, some of the big ones were frozen due to the pandemic. So the main one was civil servant wages. So this has been frozen since 2012. So the Biden Secretary of the Treasury, he had they basically decided to do this loan to the state governments. So basically the Treasury trying to avoid a worse situation in regional governments. But so they loaned them a lot of money, but basically the counterpart was that they would freeze all civil servant wages, and this is not very common in Brazil. So basically they were for 2 years without any increase in wages, and this actually reduced a lot in terms of percentage of GDP, how much we spend in payroll, which is a lot. So it used to be about 4.1% of GDP, and this year is like 3.7. So it really reduced. So that was one of the main lines in terms of expenditures that have decreased. And so it's basically a good result, really good, but it's a bit circumstantial. So what happens? So the thing is, everyone was expecting that by the end of this year, there was going to be a big discussion on what to do with the debt ceiling, which is our main fiscal anchor at the moment, because basically both candidates had promised a lot. So we just had this interesting meeting with a former Secretary of the Treasury, Jefferson Bittencourt, and he was just saying, he called it like a election auction. So it was basically both candidates saying what they would do more. So we're going to increase benefits. Oh no, we're going to increase the minimum wage. Oh no, we're going to increase. So all of that was basically just to say that all of that was kind of already in the math and in the minds of most of the economists that were doing this, that were actually planning on like post-elections. So we were already expecting at least this discussion on how to progress to next year, which is what they're discussing at the moment. And now the big question is, there is, as you said, there is the alternative of doing this via decree, but they could only do this next year because they're not in power. So basically, and also it's not very safe for them legally, because they have the memory of Dilma Rousseff being impeached by fiscal crimes. So they're scared that they wouldn't do something that would go against fiscal laws, because this could lead to an impeachment. So basically, everything signals they've just did this public speech, public announcement a couple of hours ago, saying that they are going with the option of a constitutional amendment. So basically the idea is
that has to be voted 2 times in both houses, right?
Exactly. And they have 40 days. So they have little time. It is feasible. And the positive side for them that want to, approve this, is because everybody, like all the political class, Congress, everybody wants to approve this. Nobody wants to be the one that voted against increased spending, voted against increased social benefits, the Auxílio Brasil. So they don't want this weight on them, Congress. So basically, what we think, it's the signal's point, is that they will probably approve this constitutional amendment, but it won't be as high as they would want, because basically what is not in the budget,
there'll be some horse trading and they'll water it down a little bit.
Exactly.
I mean, your economic team is that if you have a baseline of where the primary surplus could go in 2023. Now, the thing that worries me, again, I'm winding my clock from my old, Brazilian days, is that if you increase the minimum wage, then you have a bad feedback loop from the Social Security deficit, which has always been part of the problem. If today, is it your team, when you're modeling this out, what are sort of the range of realistic expectations of where the primary surplus could end at 23. I mean, just a shuchi, as we used to say.
Yeah.
I mean,
Perfect. So you're completely right. So what we have in our baseline scenario, we have all of this, which was not in the budget for next year, but is what they're discussing now, which is increases in the minimum wage, the social benefit program Auxílio Brasil at 600 reais,
right.
and some of the expenses that were not included. So based on this, we have a deficit of 0.7% for next year of GDP, but that's actually based on the fact that they will implement a new fiscal anchor next year, and this cannot, this is a possibility. They can even be like, no, we're not going to implement any fiscal anchor. So this is, of course, a hypothesis. So based on the fact that we knew that both of the governments would likely do that, which is the minimum wage thing, the social benefit, and the expenses that were not included in the budget, but were actually ongoing expenses, like something that they had to do, programs that already existed. It's already in our modeling. What's not, it's if they go above that. So, for example, they're talking about.
Well, I mean, Lula has a lot of favors to return to people.
Exactly. Yeah. So if this happens, the bill can go up to 400 billion. So we have like our
and that's when you need to short the Ibovespa.
Yeah, it is. I don't know.
Let me get some color from you, because again, there's been news coming out. I've gotten a couple of WhatsApps from friends from Brazil. Is that at the headline level, everybody believes that this is going to sort of be Lula 1.0 as opposed to Lula 2.0 or Dilma.
Yeah.
Given the fact that Bolsonaro party, won a bunch of governorships, they won Sao Paulo, and their representation in Congress acts as a handbrake on some of these things that you're talking about. So in turn, I guess they just named the transition team, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I was just reading, you have, higher frequency numbers. Is it, it's great that we have Laura Zengi and Persio Arida, leading the transition, both MIT economists, if I'm not mistaken. That's great. But it seems to be that there's a fear of a bait and switch here, where they put in these two top economists in the transition team. But yet I'm hearing that there's discussions that Fernando Haddad could be the economy minister.
Yeah.
Tell me how you're seeing because as you know, in Latin America, the economy minister, it's a personality cult.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always a team, but it depends who the person is. Is it what's the name game thing that you guys at Xispe are seeing? And it doesn't matter if Haddad is the economy minister, even though you've got these two sort of older, famous economists sort of leading the transition. And I don't know the answer to this. I'm really eager to hear what you say.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, I don't think I have the straight answer for this, because now, I mean, what we're getting in terms of high frequency news is that it's coming from all over the place. So basically, what we have at the moment is like, basically we've had three lines. So in terms of the economy ministry, and I completely agree with you, this person is going to be key to signal where we're going. And there is one thing before that, which is Bolsonaro, he united. So he basically joined three ministries. So was the finance ministry, planning, and industry and development. He merged all of this ministry into one, which is the economic ministry. Probably he will, dismantle this again and have three. The positive side on this, the negative side is that, it's not good to have planning and industry and development separate, because what we have in history is that the economic team would have the finance ministry would have a really good idea, and then the development ministry would be like, no, we can't implement that, and then it would be like stuck in a lot of, especially in like micro at the micro level, in terms of
Right.
regulatory issues, a lot of things would get basically stuck. But the flip side of this is that Lula can also, of course, he's doing that because he wants more seats and he wants to distribute more seats for the people that he owns things, as you were saying. So basically, there is a possibility that he would put someone in the finance ministry who would be more market friendly, and then in the other ministries he would use the space to put like more political figures
To pass around the candy, right?
Exactly. And I think that now we have like basically three lines. One line would be someone more like Haddad, as you said, who would be more inclined and more aligned with the like Dilma 2 Dilma government, basically Lula 2 and Dilma mandates.
The PT diehard.
Exactly, the PT diehard. So it would be more like, heterodox ideas and developments, as we call it in Portuguese, like desenvolvimentistas.
Right.
And then the other line is basically a political name. So some names have been discussed, like governors of some states that have economics background. They would be kind of the middle ground, because I don't think it would be that, it wouldn't be seen as that negative for markets, because they would be like, okay, so these people, they're not aligned with all of these hardcore ideas. And
Sure.
at the same time, they have like transit, right? So they can flow, they can like basically approach
Well, they could
other.
take the job and then they would have to prove their mettle, and
Exactly.
they'd have to prove their
Yeah.
credibility that the market will be
Because
watching at any point in time.
exactly, because also there are some names that they could be great name in terms of technical knowledge, as we had, for instance, Joaquin Levy. He's great economist, but really weak politically. So he basically couldn't do anything. And he was Duma's minister, and that was like, he couldn't do anything because he didn't have the political strength. So I think that there's like these three lines. So the more economic, like technical line, that we have some names, as you mentioned, some that are in the transition team, and then we have the political line, and then we have the more hardcore line. So which one is more likely at the moment is really hard to say, because
Well,
as
my
I
gut
said, the
instinct
news
tells
are
me
so mixed.
my gut instinct tells me that Lula, should feel very fortunate that he won the election. He should feel a bit defensive, given that he doesn't have the same representation. I want to ask you
Yeah,
about that going forward. And that, everybody floats balloons. So they may throw out the Adaji thing to see, how people
exactly.
react and so forth.
Yeah,
But I think that if he chose somebody like Adaji, it would be very risky, because the
yeah,
market would react. The Brazilians react very violently to this type of things. I
yeah,
mean, I don't know who the other names are in the mix, but if he went with Adaji, it means that he is more beholden to the party
yeah.
line,
I've
and not so
yeah.
so I don't know. That's just my instinct, that he's going to have to choose somebody who's more palatable to the
Yeah.
market.
And he's probably going to do the mix between the three ministries that
Right.
he will probably dismantle again. And because also one thing that we know about him is that he's quite smart politically, so he won't do, we say it in Portuguese, ponto sem nó. So he's, as you said, you throw the balloon and then you see. So so far what we've seen is that, last week markets were reacting pretty positive. I think it's, basically on the just on the sense that the transition were going to be positive, right? It would happen. And then at the moment that people started discussing more broadly, more in depth, actually, the fiscal issues, and then Haddad's name came out, and then some other names that markets didn't react that well. Today the vice president was in TV. So I think that he's signaling that he's vice president. That's a signal, he's quite like center, and he used to be, they used to be rivals. So political rivals, of course. And I guess this is, but it's hard to say at this moment. It's really hard to say because it's what we always say about politicians, right?
What's
You only
your
know.
sense in terms of the composition of the deputies in the Senate in terms of how it's shaken out? How much of a handbrake and is that on Lula's economic policy? I mean, you said that the whole political class wants to give out social spending because they feel that's what the populace wants. But once we get into governing, how much room does he have in the first part of his administration to really do PT type policy? I think that's the question.
Yeah, so I think that this the mixture of Congress in general is kind of it's different from the US that you can say, if Biden loses, one of the houses, it would be more balanced, or Brazil is a bit, it's quite different because we have several parties. And I think on the one hand, some investors that we see, they got the impression that this Congress, because they were aligned to Bolsonaro, that they were more, and also they called themselves like right, on the right wing, right?
Sure.
And that they would be more fiscalist in terms of what they actually defend and believe. I think this is not the case in Brazil. I think it's not a fiscalist type of Congress, but at the same time, they also want to have leveraging power with Lula, and they know this. So basically, I think it will serve indeed as kind of a barrier. So I don't think Lula will have like a very easy path to do whatever he wants if he wants to do like fiscal expansion, but not because Congress will be creating really fiscally responsible rules, but because they want the political leverage. But this is good because in the end result is the same. But it's just to say that at the same time, we also don't see that he will have a terrible time to govern, as we saw, for instance, with Dilma, which was
it'll be
even
back
when
to business as usual, is that everything that comes up with major legislation will be horse trading favors and that type of thing.
So we shouldn't expect
Bolsonaros who say they're
major
purists may not be purists because they want to achieve something. So
and I think that in Brazil is really hard to say that we have like all of this fiscalist politicians. Even Bolsonaro this last year was completely a different government, and even his campaign. So I think it's more on the political game than anything else. And so I think it's a positive on that sense, because if by one hand it means that we won't see major reforms likely, so we shouldn't expect a lot of structural reforms coming out, but at the same time we won't also see major changes in terms of fiscal expansion. So a lot of investors were scared that, for example, the government would reverse reforms that were implemented, like central bank independency, or even the labor reform or social security reform. And it's quite clear that this won't happen because they wouldn't
I think
spend their capital
Lula
on this.
is too smart for that. And he would have had Fernando Henrique backing his presidency if that was going to be his plan, even though Fernando Henrique is very old now. I mean, so your Xispe team, I mean, I suspect you're more on the economic side and that type of thing. Is that out of all this, what's your gut feeling when you talk to your strategists and so forth? Is it bullish? Is it bearish? Or it's wait and see to see where the path comes. I know that it's a moving target and news is coming out in every moment. What's the sense on the ground there? Is that there are people who have been very bullish, Brazil. I saw two of the top hedge funds today in the newspapers that, SPX says it's a great time, that Lula's not stupid. And then we have Stoeppelwerth, who comes from my time frame, who I think is probably the best hedge fund manager in Brazil, saying he doesn't like the signals. So what's your sense sitting here today for Argentine investors who want to, invest in ADRs or invest in the bonds? Is
Yeah.
that you think we're still in wait and see because we just don't have enough information, or do you think it's a situation in which Lula understands that he has to be more of Lula of 1.0 than
Yeah.
2.0 in order to make the PT project come back to life?
Yeah. I think for now, in terms of economic policies, we're still in the wait and see. It's really mixed signals so far, because at the same time that, he says he talks about Haddad, Alckmin is in the TV, and then Bereshwari is in the team, and then Boulos is in the team. So very left-wing person. So what I think, but then that said, I think that if we look at the Brazilian market in itself, a lot of this has been priced in. So for example, last year when the debt ceiling was changed, by November, I think it was November, December, a lot of people. So sometimes I hear in the press saying, "Oh, markets didn't care when that happened." Actually, yes, a lot of things changed by then. Right, so we saw future interest rates increasing. We saw a lot of fall in the Ibovespa. We saw the real going, much lower than it's like fair value that we would calculate based on a lot of other factors like ours,
Right.
balance of payments. So basically, since then, I think markets have been pricing in a lot of this risk, and now a lot of our assets are still undervalued. Of course, that a lot of this has been changing for the past months because we've been receiving a lot of, especially international inflow of capital.
No, the carry trade, everybody's doing the roll down on the drop in inflation. So.
Exactly. But at the same time, we see, we still have undervalued assets in our stock exchange. And if you look at our stock exchange, in the end, we discuss economics, this is our role, and of course it's very important. But if you look at the exchange and at the stock exchange in Brazil, it's 30% commodities, 30% banks, and then 20% retail, something, everything else, right? And even if we look at this everything else, we see, for example, education, a lot of education companies, construction companies for low income households, all of this will probably benefit from the movements from all the policies that the new government will implement. So we don't, at the moment, at least in the economics team, we don't work with the scenario that everything will fall apart, that Lula will be like, there's no fiscal anchor, let's spend 500 billion reais and let's go back to using BNDES as subsidized lending for JBS. Like, we don't see that really, ultra negative scenario, but there is a good likelihood that something worse than what we had planned as our base case happens. But that doesn't mean that all of this in the stock exchange won't be true. So we're still going to be like 30% commodities, 30% banks. Our central bank is still independent.
And again, I mean, Brazil has always been a derivative on China. So
exactly.
If China reopens, then you could get Valley, moving up as the, I was going to ask you about Petrobras, but I think Petrobras is a hot potato, right now. But I think that the commodity piece, the steel companies and so forth really need the Chinese reopening and that view to get started. So it's a stock picker's market, is what you're saying.
Exactly. It's a stock picker's market. And also, if you look at the fixed income market, what we see is that our companies, since the last, they have been, it's the hard truth, but they have been through so many crises. Then if you look at actually the balance sheet of all of these companies that are issuing bonds, they're in very good financial shape.
Right.
So you see bonds, like Brazilian companies issuing bonds overseas. You see, and also the bonds here, they're like, because all of our assets are undervalued and because of all of these fiscal developments and discussions, our DI curve is still very high. So basically, we're still paying a lot for our debt. So all of these companies, they are in good financial shape, but they're paying the government's price. So I think this will not cease to be true regardless of what happens. So I think it's a stock picking, bond picking market, and it's a market that we don't see like the worst case scenario that we've seen.
Sure.
Also because it's a political game, and as you said, Lula's quite smart. So I think this is our general view.
Well, that's fantastic, Rachel. I mean, you've given us a lot of insight, and again, I know it's a moving target, and
it's hard. I wish I could
really
say
think that,
more, but it's hard.
but I mean, I think it's very in depth in a short period of time, and we'll be watching it closely. Like I said, is that given you're the big neighbor up top, is that what happens in Brazil, as they say, it's if you guys fall over, then we fall in a ditch. So it's extremely important to see what happens. And again, it's nice to meet you. I hope next time I'm in Brazil we can sit down, and
yes, certainly.
hopefully we can do another one of these in the future. But I really appreciate you taking the time, and I think our Novus clients will also, it's a very rare thing to get somebody with such fresh information. So take it easy, and we'll hopefully speak again soon.
Thank you so much. And of course, whenever you need, Joaquin has my contact now, and I hope I've helped, and hopefully we can see each other soon in Brazil.
Good deal.
Thank you very much.
Again. Bye bye.
Thank you all. Cheers.